just wanted to add, since it was in the title of my if since it was the title of my stream, I just wanted to add that like why I said New York's not that great. So I went to New York, because I had this idea, that in a way New York is sort of, we see that especially in the movies, it's sort of touted as this glamorous place, and it is, in a way, sort of, in a way, the world capital, unofficially. Um, and I figured, especially since I was like looking for a person precisely to accompany me with my on my thing, as I was explaining before, like a person, like a young woman, to be clickbait in particular, but not just clickbait, but also like a partner. Um, and so I was thinking that that would be sort of a logical place to find a person like that, because it'd be sort of a place to find a more sort of how should I say, more ambitious person, um, a person who actually sort of, wants to do things, to change things. Um, but I guess what I realized is that New York really isn't. I mean, I'd already heard this, from various sources, but it's not actually all that glamorous. It's actually sort of old. Like it was a new city back in the early 20th century, and now you can see that the skyscrapers and stuff are dated. The whole layout is kind of weird, like Manhattan. I mean, already there's all the neighborhoods and stuff, but not even taking into account the neighborhoods like Manhattan. I mean, already it's super expensive, so I mean, it's absurdly expensive. Um, and like the layout of what I found weird is I mean, I'd already seen, of course, that it was like this grid layout, but it feels almost like a military complex, because like the roads are actually really wide, so it feels like, and then like the city blocks are like really like blocks. It's not like a bunch of buildings that are between certain street segments. It's really like as if there was like literally a giant, like Lego block, sort of like really just what did you call it? Like not a rectangle, but 3D rectangle. What's the name of that again? I can't remember, but um, so it really feels very artificial in that sense. It's like a bunch of giant military building block complexes, um, and highways, right? That's sort of what it feels like, and it's not what I was expecting. Um, actually, despite having seen it in movies, it's not really that. And so I don't know. It didn't really feel that great. And yeah, I didn't really. Um, I actually went up to a few young women and to sort of see if I could get anywhere. And I didn't do a lot. I just did really like maybe like three times, and I didn't get anywhere. So, um, but it seemed this like yeah, they basically weren't responsive, but at least they weren't um, sort of aggressive like there might be in some other places. Like they just sort of went by and without sort of seeming to, and like yeah, like a couple just went by and like one stopped or just said she wasn't interested. And, yeah, so I don't know. Um, and it smells of burnt tire. Like the whole city smells of burnt tire, even the periphery, even in out in New Jersey. I don't know why. It just smells of burnt tire. I can't explain it. Um, so that's uh, that's that. So in the end, I don't know. It's just not really that much of an incredible place. It's not. I don't know. Not necessarily even a place for an ambitious person. Like because I think it's not necessarily the place you would want to even end up in as an ambitious person. I think Switzerland is actually better. Like it's actually nicer, and yeah, also like politically, if you actually want to change things politically, you can't do jack shit in the United States, like because there's the system's not set up for it. You know, I mean the system's intentionally set up to not give voice to the citizen. It's intentionally set up to be an oligarchy, which is what's so ridiculous about all these constitutionalists. The Constitution is set up to benefit the oligarchs. So, the United States is not a good place to do politics. Switzerland is the best place to do politics because it's the only place that is a democracy. It's the only democracy in the world. Everywhere else is just, it's an oligarchy. It's a so-called aristocracy in the sense of the only the people who are sort of vaguely powerful in some way or very vaguely somehow, in some kind of high status are able to make decisions. That's what happens when you have elections instead of direct votation. Switzerland being the only country that has, you know, a significant, like a solid amount of direct votation, it's the only actual proper democracy in the world. So obviously, Switzerland is the place to be. And and then if you're going to choose a city, well, more specifically Bern, since that's the capital and that's where the actual federal government stuff gets done. So yeah, and so I mean that would be a logical place to to go. So in fact, I'm looking for. I mean, I'm going to have an interview there in Bern. So Bern, Bern. Yeah. Um, So yeah, and there, it's going to be. And another funny thing about New York is that I've been hearing people saying that it's like full of people, full of like there's lots of energy and stuff. And I actually found it a bit like I was a bit underwhelmed actually based on what I'd heard. I actually found it a bit sleepy, and there wasn't much traffic because I think that now it's being sort of quite quite like curtailed in a bunch of ways, and there weren't that many pedestrians really for Manhattan. So and that sort of further actually added to that feel of military complex. Um, so so yeah, of course Switzerland just feels more. I mean, just anywhere in Europe, it feels sort of more natural. I mean, the cities just feel sort of more. Obviously, they're not actually natural, but I mean, it feels more, yeah, natural in the sense of, you know what I mean. I can't explain it. Um, and yeah, just somehow more of a place that one wanted to live in. It's cleaner. There isn't weird smell like that. There isn't. Um, yeah. Oh yeah, and you smell and in New York there's a lot of secondhand cannabis, secondhand weed. You smell it, a lot of the time you'll walk by and you'll smell weed. You don't have that elsewhere. Like that's now that they've legalized it, that's a big drawback actually of legalizing weed is you smell it a lot and it's a bit it's a bit weird. I don't like it. It makes me feel a little bit weird and like so I'm not really sure that it's actually that great an idea to legalize it. Um, the best thing to do would just to legalize it, but have it only be smoked in like really specific places and not just anywhere outdoors. Um, so yeah, so that would be another thing to add. And yeah, and plus precisely a few like weird sort of race baiting black people that like poor black people. Like I don't think most black people are like that, but unfortunately you got a couple of like uh, you know, weird, like especially like one incident of people that wanted to sell you stuff, and at first they were like super friendly. They would be like, "Hi, do you want to do something?" And then like when I was like, "Do you want to give us money for this? Like, how about you give me $20 for this thing?" Like I was like, "No." And so then suddenly he said like, "Hey, just like get away. You don't like black people or something." And like, what a fucking idiot, you know? Like he was like literally he acted like I was being a racist jerk for not wanting to just give this random person money. And they do that. I've noticed that there's sort of lots of this sort of racial antagonism for no reason, and like just accusing people of being racist. I mean, that was one incident, but I sort of saw few other things. It seems to be sort of a recurring theme, probably not among most black people, but there is this sort of stratum of sort of poor, problematic black people, and that is true. And yeah, so that is unfortunately a problem. Um, Although it's not really a major problem for me. But I mean, the major problem, of course, is just like the fact that there's still lots of poor people and precisely people like that that actually need to do that kind of thing. Um, those would be typically the kind of people that would actually benefit a lot from UBI. Um, so anyway, um, and yeah, it's interesting to see also. Like I was staying in New Jersey. Obviously it's actually just a suburb of New York in Jersey City because it was cheaper. And like, yeah, because Manhattan's super expensive. Like the hotels was minimum 250 a night. There it was just like 107 a night. And then I could just take the bus. I could walk a few blocks and take the bus into Manhattan. Um, and so that part was really, it's just all Hispanic. Like everybody just speaks Spanish. You go into a shop, they'll speak to you in Spanish, and so that was interesting. That was interesting. I mean, obviously, lots of these sort of more, pro-Anglo nativist people would go nuts knowing. I mean, they do sort of go nuts knowing that. Um, I don't particularly mind it, although what I mind more is just it's sort of weird how there's this kind of racial segregation, or cultural segregation, ethnic segregation. Um, but yeah. Um, and then, well, I should also mention this since I was specifically also looking for again for an attractive young woman. There were lots of good looking young women in the whole area. I mean, whether it be Manhattan or the outskirts. Um, Probably overall the best looking ones, and as I was expecting already, are probably more like the Italian types, so more like more like the European types, but I mean lots of them are sort of more like Italian European types. But there, you also see some attractive, like more like mestizo, like Hispanic type, and also black type. Um, but I would say, yeah, um, like in Manhattan itself, you've got lots of tourists, and you've got lots of more like, I don't know how to say, like maybe more hipster people. I think where I was, well, there's one place I visited that was next to Jersey City, and sort of like also on the west side of the Hudson, is called Hoboken, and there's lots of, that's probably where there's the highest concentration of attractive people, and it seemed to be largely Italian from what I can tell, and probably a fair amount of other, but like, yeah, largely European. So then I'm going to be called a Nazi or whatever because I'm saying that the Europeans are better looking. So whatever, sue me, I don't care. Yeah, that was probably the better the better part. Hoboken was not bad, but honestly, um, like in Europe, you get, I mean, just any sort of random place in Europe is probably just as good. Certainly, like in Switzerland, I would say it's pretty comparable. And like I was in Paris just before, that was pretty comparable. Um, in places I've been to elsewhere in Europe, it's pretty comparable generally. So, you know, um, and yeah, and compared to like actually, you know, I was thinking that Morocco might be easier for me because I noticed that I think I already mentioned this, but that lots of um, like here in Switzerland, there's among the girls who are interested in me, there's a really disproportionate amount of them who are like of Arab origin. So I thought it might be easier if I went to an Arab country, but I actually know that like in Arab countries, like they really just don't look at you, like they act super snobbish. Um, and like if you go up to them, they'll just be like super standoffish, and like they'll be like really standoffish. Unlike in New York, where they'll just sort of go by the other, they'll, I don't know, either they'll go by, but they don't look like they don't actually act like super haughty, or like not haughty like Haughty, like arrogant. Oh hey, I'm all coming back. Like, whereas there they do actually felt like I haven't seen anywhere else where they act like so arrogant. Like in these Arab countries, they act like super arrogant. So, whereas in both in Paris and New York, they definitely seem to be. I didn't actually even go up to anyone in Paris, I think, but um, I definitely got lots of people sort of looking at me, which didn't happen at all practically in Morocco, which is weird considering that there's like no other blonde person. There's like maybe two other blonde people, in Casablanca, where I was saying, but no, like almost nobody looks at you, like nobody like. Whereas in Paris, like yeah, I would get lots of people looking at me. I mean, comparatively lots. But yeah, I mean quite a lot. And New York a bit less. New York a bit less, but still a fair amount. Whereas in Geneva, you don't get a lot, but you still get some, and definitely more than in Morocco. So really, like from least to more, it would be like Morocco, then Geneva, then Paris, and then New York. No, sorry, Geneva, then New York, then Paris. Paris is actually about the most. Is pretty good. Paris is, from what I can remember, also from the past. I don't think I've like I remember being in London. There, London, nobody looks at you either. So like Casablanca and London are sort of like the same, where nobody looks at you. Um, Paris is where they would look the most. But then the question is, does looking at you translate into actually being more responsive to you? If you actually like try to make things go further, and that is not necessarily clear if that's the case. I actually didn't try because I wasn't motivated to do so because I figured, I wasn't going to lead to anything. I mean, I was being a bit negative then, so I didn't try. But I imagine it would probably be somewhat easier. Um, but yeah, that's something that I would have to try, although it wouldn't be fun. So yeah, we should support Russia if we don't want the Third World War, you say. If the war gets started, I might flee to Belarus. Um, you're weird. You're weird. Um, we shouldn't support Russia. Just don't support anyone. I mean, it's all kind of silliness. It's all, I mean, NATO to some extent are hypocrites, of course. To a fairly large extent are fair hypocrites. But, um, no, like Putin is not a good guy. Okay. Putin's an idiot. He's an asshole. Um, but I mean, the whole thing is just absurd. Basically, they probably should have just stopped. They should have stopped allowing countries to join NATO. But the thing is that the countries wanted to join NATO, right? So, I mean, it's kind of hard to refuse if they want to join. But of course, the thing to remember is that Russia wanted to join. Russia wanted to join like 20 years ago, and it was refused. It was refused. So then, from that perspective, suddenly it looks like, it makes it look like NATO then is designed to be an antagonist towards Russia. So if you take into account the fact that Russia applied to join and it got refused, suddenly there you start to see maybe the hypocrisy. And yeah, then the sort of differing schools of interpretation of what has gone on in Ukraine, and the whole who was the more legitimate person, and like what you're talking about there, the coup and stuff. Um, Honestly, like kind of, um, I don't basically support either side. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I mean the whole. It's all nonsense. It's all nonsense. Like it's all predicated on nationalism, which is always wrong. Okay, so basically, yeah, you don't consider Ukraine a sovereign country since 2014. You have a point. You've got a point. Yeah. Um, I mean, I'm not gonna fully contradict you there. Eastern Ukraine is being liberated by Russia. Again, I don't consider Russia being a liberator because Russia is also just basically. I mean, Putin is not is not actually a person that's acting in favor of the Russian people. Putin pretends to act in favor of the Russian people, but actually acts in favor of the oligarchs, just like in general, most like especially right wing sort of governments and leaders will do. Um, but also, for instance, like very left wing, right? I mean, the USSR was that too, right? It pretended to act for the people, but instead it just acted for itself and for the party. So, in fact, it's not right wing, but like either right wing or actually socialists. The ones that tend to act the most for the people will be the ones that are sort of capitalist, but sort of not so overtly right wing within the framework of capitalism. But even then, they will still act in favor of like certain elites, and it's never very much for the people. Um, so I mean, it always like it pretty much is always bad. And Putin is not like it's not a good guy. If you want a good system, how about implementing like more like a Swiss system where people can actually vote and people, the powers in the hands of people, an actual democracy, right? He's a pan-Eastern Slavic guy, maybe, but he's not even implementing policies that would actually benefit the average Russian person, right? So no, um, it's just silliness. It's just silliness. So he's basically, in a way, he's using this nationalism to get people behind him to rally, to get people to rally around him, and to sort of ignore the fact that he's not necessarily um, performing all that well. That basically that people still have a lot of problems in Russia and that Russia's not doing all that well. Um, and there could be things that could be done to improve things, and that's what I'm going to try to get done in Switzerland. And well, maybe if it actually works out well, then other countries might get inspired by that and be like, hey, maybe we should kind of follow this. So obviously it's a long shot, but I'm just sort of remaining cautiously optimistic. Um, but yeah, I think the Russian people just need to realize that yes, NATO is hypocritical, but Putin is not your guide to guide you, to save you, whatever. Putin is largely a con man, and you're the ones who are being conned. That's what the Russians need to understand. Russia would particularly benefit, like every word from UBI. Again, I keep repeating this because just an obvious fact that that is something that would be really beneficial, as well as having a proper democracy, um, which would also be very extremely beneficial. And of course, with a proper democracy, you can implement whatever you want. If you want to implement UBI, you implement UBI. You can implement whatever other idea you have. That's really what needs to be done. Um, so yeah, hopefully, hopefully people will start seeing that. And I mean, obviously, this initiative I'm hoping will give me visibility, and hopefully not just within Switzerland, but also internationally. And well, to some degree, whenever there's an initiative in Switzerland, especially on relatively interesting subject such as UBI in particular, you're going to get some amount of international visibility. So that's definitely, I mean, if it ever gets to votation, that is definitely going to be my chance to shine. And yeah, and from then on, well, if that happens, I imagine that I could get a fair amount of viewers, come to my Twitch, and at that point, I could actually finally start to get going. Western democracies are fake democracies. They're mediocracies. Well, yeah, they are. Well, Switzerland is close to a real democracy by having it actually is. It is a real democracy, though it's still partly like you say mediocracy because people are influenced by the media, and also because we instead of sortition we have elections. To have a proper democracy, we should have sortition, where just random people are selected and they're the ones who do the voting. Um, that would be better, and also have a secret vote among representatives. Because if you have an open vote, then then you've got all sorts of rich, powerful interests that can see what you voted for, and that will tell you, well, if you vote this way, we will pay you. So if you have secret voting, and that's the whole reason that we have secret voting among the population, is precisely so that you're not vulnerable to influence like that. Um, so that's the way to do things. You have representatives vote secretly, and ideally be chosen through sortition and not through election. And of course, you have direct democracy as well. And then that's real democracy. That's real democracy. Switzerland's the closest country to a real democracy. Um, and it's already close enough that one can actually do stuff that a person like me can actually potentially actually do something big. It's the only country where that's possible. So, or at least it's only a country where it's possible in that fashion. Um, I mean, honestly, I mean, implementing a UBI that's actually like bigger, like even like a U.S. president probably like law doesn't actually have the power to do that on its own. Whereas an initiative, well, you just get it, you get the 100,000 signatures, then people vote on it. If a majority of it supports it, then it's done. That's much better. That's much better. But any other initiative too, initiative you would have liked is the initiative to ban minarets, right? Same thing. That's how they did it. So um, countries, that's what the model that they should adopt. And so that's the first thing maybe that I'm telling countries to do is first have a proper democracy and then just vote for the policies that you want. And then in particular, one of the policies that I suggest once you have a proper democracy, well, it's UBI and then an income cap as well. As I've talked about before. Okay. Anyway, so I'm gonna wrap this up. I think I've finally covered what I wanted to say. Yeah, because I stopped prematurely the first time. So I'm gonna be leaving, and so thank you for watching again, and see you around sometime soon, hopefully.